I was mind blown by how I could quickly learn how to paint watercolor portraits. So how did I 10x my skills and how long did it take me? I wanted to be able to create portraits that look like this or like this, but after failing over and over again, I had to sit down and ask myself a simple but very important question. What are the key elements that I needed to focus on to achieve those results as soon as possible? I have been taking my art seriously for about 6 months now, but there was one area that was frustrating me. And you guessed it, watercolor portraits. After spending hours doing research, I was shocked by how simple and straightforward the solution was. Now, the tips I'm going to share with you in this video apply to whatever you want to paint with watercolor. And disclaimer, I am not a professional. I have been doing this for about 6 months now, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. Everything I say is from my experience. The first thing I needed to understand was how watercolor works. I needed to understand which technique to use and when to use it. If I wanted a more blended color mixture with soft transitions, I needed to use the wet on wet technique. And if I wanted more detail, more control, sharp edges, and sharp transitions, I needed to use the wet on dry. Understanding and knowing how to mix these two techniques in a painting allowed me to add more depth to my paintings. I also needed to learn how to layer my colors. In the beginning, I would take a color from the palette and apply it directly to the paper, which is a huge no-no if you intend to add details later on. Layering allows you the flexibility to add details and add depth to a painting, and you can do this if you go from a lighter color mixture to a more saturated or darker color mixture. That means understanding how much water you need to use when mixing your colors and how clean your brushes are when you're using them. So that means having at least 2 jars that you used to clean your brushes. After understanding how watercolor works, the next step was understanding light and color. The key to improving your color and lighting observations is by using simple objects. When I discovered this, it wasn't intentional. As you have probably learned by now, I love painting portraits, but I was terrible at them. And that was very frustrating for me because all the portraits I was doing were not coming out the way I wanted them to. So I kind of gave up and decided to start painting food. But when I started to paint food like cherries and grapes, paying attention to the shadows, highlights, and midtones was so easy because the shapes were so simple and basic. I didn't feel so much pressure when painting them. After painting food for a while, I gathered my courage and decided to paint my first portrait. And I was mind blown. This was my first attempt, so as you can see, I was very intentional about leaving out the highlights and adding the shadows so the painting has a little more depth. Then I thought, you know what? I would try again, and this time I was even more surprised by what I was able to do. As you can see, I was able to pay attention to the tiny details like the shadows in her neck, the collarbone, and the highlights on the nose, cheek, neck, and lip. Could this portrait be improved? Yes, but by comparing my current self to my past self, I could see that the growth was there and it was huge. Even though I didn't use a lot of color, you could tell I was using the wet on wet, the wet on dry, and layering, which helped add a little more depth. Always remember, when you're trying to learn something, the best way to do it is by simplifying the thing that you're trying to learn to a very basic form. That's why using fruits worked because of their basic shapes for me. Now that I have understood how to study light and color, the next step was deciding how I would practice. For practice, I had to keep it super simple by doing 2 things. Number 1, be consistent. The key to being consistent is keeping the process as simple and as frictionless as possible. So how did I achieve this? So the first thing was having a list of the things that I wanted to learn and improve. Then I would pick days of the week and a specific time during those days when I would practice. And then finally, I would give myself a task of producing at least one completed portrait study a week. The second thing I did during my practice time was drawing different things. I realized that drawing the same type of thing or using the same medium over and over kind of prevented me from seeing things from different perspectives. For example, learning to paint shadows with colored pencil was easier for me than painting with watercolor. The way I would look at a fruit when painting it helped me simplify the face. The fruits helped me build confidence when painting portraits. Find what works for you, and you don't have to practice every day. I told myself I wanted to be able to do art for the rest of my life, and that helped me realize that I didn't have to rush because I have the rest of my life to learn, and I don't want to be miserable, but instead I want to enjoy the journey. I have found resources that have helped me a lot, and the first resource is YouTube. YouTube is by far my favorite social media platform. I have found so many amazing channels that share their art journeys, how to grow your skills, finances for artists, business advice, and so many of their experiences. So here is a list of the YouTubers that have held my hand through the last 6 months. The next resource is Pinterest. On Pinterest, I don't really have anyone in particular that I follow, so I use it mainly for finding references and inspiration. I find that each time I open Pinterest, I feel very energized and very motivated to create. As you can see, I have different mood boards that I use to store pictures and videos that I would love to draw inspiration from or practice. The third and final resource is Instagram. I am someone who hated Instagram. Well, I still kind of do, but after I started doing art, I found a community that I love being a part of, and here is a list of accounts that I love and I follow. At the end of the day, the secret to growing as an artist is finding what works for you. This means trying different things, not being afraid to make ugly art, because there are no mistakes, and the most important thing you should practice is patience. Without patience, you will never be able to grow as an artist, and you will always be miserable because you will not be kind to yourself. Patience is kindness. Always remember that. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.